What happens when Hollywood's sweetheart meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Anne Hathaway sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find herself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would end her walking off set in disgust. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is the moment that exposes the dark underbelly of late-night entertainment and shows exactly why Jimmy Kimmel's ratings are plummeting faster than a stone. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most explosive talk show confrontation we've seen all year. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation. Cameras were rolling, and Anne Hathaway walked onto the stage with her trademark gracious smile, waving to the crowd as they erupted in applause. She looked stunning in a tailored navy blazer, her hair perfectly styled, embodying the picture of Hollywood elegance that has made her a beloved figure for over 2 decades. But beneath that polished exterior, those who know the industry could sense something different about her demeanor. A slight tension in her shoulders, a guardedness in her eyes that suggested she was prepared for battle. Jimmy Kimmel, meanwhile, sat behind his desk with that familiar smirk that has become his signature look. But tonight, there was something more predatory about his expression, like a hunter who had been waiting all day for the perfect prey to wander into his trap. His opening monologue had been particularly bitter, filled with the kind of cynical commentary that has increasingly alienated viewers who remember when late-night television was about entertainment rather than character assassination. As Anne settled into the guest chair, adjusting her blazer and crossing her legs with practiced poise, the audience could feel an electric tension in the air. Something was different about this interview from the moment it began. Kimmel's usual fake charm felt more forced than ever, and Anne's responses carried an undercurrent of steel that viewers had never heard before. "Anne Hathaway, everybody," Kimmel announced with exaggerated enthusiasm, his voice dripping with the kind of theatrical warmth that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Thanks for being here tonight. You look like someone who's ready to promote a movie." The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. It seemed innocuous enough on the surface, but anyone familiar with Kimmel's interviewing style could recognize the subtle dig embedded within what should have been a compliment. Anne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who has navigated Hollywood's treacherous waters for years. "Thank you for having me, Jimmy," she replied, her voice warm but with an edge. That suggested she wasn't going to be pushed around tonight. Though I have to say, that's quite an interesting way to welcome a guest. The audience laughed, but it was the kind of nervous laughter that erupts when people sense conflict brewing beneath the surface. Kimmel's smile faltered for just a moment, before he recovered, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance that has become his trademark. "Oh, come on, Anne. We're all friends here, right? I mean, we've known each other for years. Remember when you hosted the Oscars and—" He paused dramatically, letting the weight of that infamous moment settle over the studio like a dark cloud. Anne's jaw visibly tightened. The 2011 Academy Awards ceremony, which she co-hosted with James Franco, had been a career low point that she had spent years trying to overcome. It was a wound that had never fully healed, despite her subsequent successes, and everyone in Hollywood knew it was a subject she preferred to leave buried in the past. "I remember it being a learning experience," she said carefully, her voice controlled but with a dangerous undertone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Though I'm curious why you'd bring up something from over a decade ago when we're here to talk about my new film." Kimmel shrugged with mock innocence, but his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who had just landed the first blow in what promised to be a brutal fight. "Hey, it's all part of your journey, right? Besides, our audience loves hearing about those behind-the-scenes moments when things don't go exactly as planned." But what happened next would prove that Jimmy Kimmel had severely underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. Anne Hathaway slowly placed her hands on the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white with tension as she leaned forward slightly. The studio lights caught the fire in her eyes as she fixed Kimmel with a stare that could have melted steel. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "You know what, Jimmy? I've sat through a lot of interviews over the years. I've dealt with condescending questions, inappropriate comments, and hosts who think they're comedians at my expense. But I've always maintained my professionalism because that's what we do in this business." She paused, letting her words sink in as the audience sat in stunned silence. "But tonight feels different." Kimmel's smirk wavered as he realized he might have pushed too far too fast. But rather than backing down, his ego kicked in, and he doubled down with the reckless abandon of someone who had grown too comfortable being the bully in the room. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for asking legitimate questions about your career?" he said, spreading his hands in mock confusion. "I mean, come on, Anne. You can't cherry-pick which parts of your career we're allowed to discuss. The Oscars thing was public. Everyone saw it. And let's be honest, it wasn't exactly your finest moment." The audience gasped audibly. Even by Kimmel's standards, this was crossing a line that most professional interviewers wouldn't dare approach. Anne's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, and then something far more dangerous: complete composure. "Legitimate questions?" she repeated, her voice rising just enough to carry across the studio without losing its measured control. "Jimmy, when was the last time you asked a male actor about his career low points in the first 5 minutes of an interview? When was the last time you brought up Brad Pitt's box office bombs or asked Leonardo DiCaprio about his awkward award show moments?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to drop. Kimmel's face flushed red as he realized he had walked straight into a trap of his own making. The audience began to murmur, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A guest who was fighting back against the host's notorious brand of mean-spirited humor. That's completely different," Kimmel stammered, his usual quick wit abandoning him at the worst possible moment. "Those guys haven't hosted award shows that were universally panned." Anne's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through the studio like a blade. "Universally panned? By who? The same critics who praised James Franco for being himself, while crucifying me for not being funny enough? The same industry that gave him a pass for being stoned on stage while I was labeled as trying too hard?" She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and powerful. The cameras caught every second as Hollywood's darling transformed before their eyes into something far more formidable. A woman who had finally reached her breaking point after years of systematic undermining disguised as entertainment. "You want to talk about career moments, Jimmy? Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about how your ratings have been in free fall for months, because audiences are tired of watching you tear down guests instead of celebrating them. Let's talk about how many A-list celebrities have quietly removed your show from their promotional tours because they're sick of your ambush-style interviews." Kimmel's face went pale. These were industry secrets that weren't supposed to be discussed on live television, truths that everyone in Hollywood knew but pretended didn't exist. Anne was pulling back the curtain on the ugly reality behind the glittering facade of late-night television. "Anne, I think you're overreacting here," Kimmel said, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. "We're just having a conversation." "A conversation?" Anne's voice rose to a level that filled every corner of the studio. "This isn't a conversation, Jimmy. This is a hit job. And frankly, I'm done being your target." The tension in the room was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Audience members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure whether to applaud or remain silent. The camera operators exchanged glances, wondering if they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. But Anne wasn't finished. But what she said next would shatter every remaining pretense of civility and launch this confrontation into territory that no one could have predicted. Anne stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, her eyes blazing with a fury that had been building for years. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every woman who had ever been diminished, dismissed, or destroyed by men who wielded their platforms like weapons. You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? It's that you think you're untouchable. You think you can sit behind that desk night after night, tearing down people who are actually creating something meaningful, and nobody will ever call you out on it. She placed her hands on his desk, leaning forward until she was close enough that he couldn't escape her gaze. But I know things about you, Jimmy. Things that would make your audience question everything they think they know about their beloved late-night host. The color drained from Kimmel's face completely. For the first time in his career, he looked genuinely afraid. The audience could sense the shift in power dynamic as clearly as if a spotlight had suddenly swung from him to her. "Anne, I think we should take a commercial break," he said weakly, reaching for the button that would signal his producers to cut away. "Oh no," Anne said, her voice cutting through his attempt to escape like a knife through paper. "We're not taking any breaks. You started this conversation, and we're going to finish it right here, right now, in front of all these people who tune in every night thinking they're watching entertainment." She turned to face the audience directly, her posture commanding, and her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from someone who has finally decided to stop playing by rules that were designed to silence her. Do you want to know what really happens behind the scenes of shows like this? Do you want to know why so many female guests look uncomfortable when they sit in that chair? It's because hosts like Jimmy here have created an environment where women are expected to smile and laugh while being systematically humiliated for the entertainment of others. Kimmel tried to interrupt, his voice cracking with desperation. "That's not... I would never..." "Wouldn't you?" Anne whipped around to face him again, her hair flying dramatically as she moved. "What about Sarah Michelle Gellar? What about the interview where you spent 10 minutes making jokes about her age and asking if she felt irrelevant now that younger actresses were getting the roles she used to book? What about Jennifer Love Hewitt, when you made those disgusting comments about her body and then acted like she was being oversensitive when she called you out?" The studio had fallen so silent that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Even the band members were staring in shock as Anne systematically dismantled years of Kimmel's carefully constructed public persona. "And let's talk about what happens when the cameras stop rolling," Anne continued, her voice gaining momentum like a freight train that had lost its brakes. "Let's talk about the after-parties, where you and your producers rate female guests on their willingness to play, along with your brand of humor. Let's talk about the blacklist of actresses who are considered difficult because they won't sit there and smile while you mock their careers, their appearances, their personal lives." Kimmel was now visibly sweating under the studio lights, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by the hunted look of a man who suddenly realized his secrets were no longer safe. He kept glancing toward the wings, clearly hoping someone would rescue him from this nightmare, but his producers seemed frozen in shock. "You're making accusations that you can't prove," he said, but his voice lacked any conviction. It was the desperate plea of a man who knew he had been caught. Anne laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the bitter satisfaction of someone who had finally cornered their tormentor. "Can't I? Jimmy, in the age of social media and cell phone cameras, do you really think your behavior has gone unnoticed? Do you think the women in this industry don't talk to each other? Do you think we don't share stories about which shows are safe and which ones are hunting grounds for predatory hosts?" She pulled out her phone, holding it up so the cameras could capture it clearly. "I have text messages, Jimmy. Screenshots of conversations between actresses warning each other about your show. I have audio recordings from green rooms where your staff discusses which guests will be fun to mess with and which ones might cause problems if pushed too far." The audience was now completely captivated, realizing they were witnessing not just an argument, but the complete destruction of a television host's career happening in real time. Some were pulling out their own phones to record this historic moment. "This is insane," Kimmel muttered, but his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "What's insane?" Anne said, her voice rising to fill every corner of the studio, "is that it took this long for someone to finally say what everyone in Hollywood has been thinking for years. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would ensure that this confrontation would be remembered as the moment that changed late-night television forever." Anne turned back to the audience one final time, her voice carrying the weight of every woman who had ever been silenced, every actress who had been forced to smile through humiliation, every person who had been made to feel small for someone else's entertainment. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Jimmy Kimmel Live for years, thinking you were seeing genuine conversations between celebrities and a charming host. But what you've actually been watching is a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare designed to make women in this industry feel powerless and afraid." She held up her phone again, her finger hovering over the screen. "Right now, I have the contact information for reporters from Entertainment Tonight, Access Hollywood, Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter. With one swipe, I can send them everything I've been talking about tonight. Every recording, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that proves what I'm saying is true." Kimmel lurched forward in his chair, desperation written across his face. "Anne, please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally. We can work this out." "Work this out?" Anne's laugh was sharp and final. "Jimmy, there's nothing to work out. You've spent years building your career on the systematic destruction of other people's dignity. And tonight, that stops." She swiped her phone with a dramatic flourish, the sound of the notification echoing through the studio speakers as the audio equipment picked up the electronic chime. "There, it's done. Every major entertainment outlet now has access to the evidence of what really happens on this show." The audience erupted into chaos. Some people were cheering, others were gasping, in shock, and many were frantically trying to record every second of this unprecedented moment on their phones. The camera operators continued filming, unsure of what else to do as television history unfolded before their eyes. Kimmel stood up behind his desk, his face red with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "You just destroyed my career. You just ruined everything I've built." Anne stepped back from his desk, straightening her blazer with the composed dignity of someone who had just won the most important battle of her life. "No, Jimmy. You destroyed your own career the moment you decided that other people's pain was your entertainment. I just gave you the platform to show the world who you really are." She turned to walk toward the exit, but paused at the edge of the stage, addressing the stunned audience one last time. "To everyone watching at home, and to everyone sitting in this studio tonight, you deserve better than this. You deserve entertainment that lifts people up instead of tearing them down. You deserve hosts who celebrate their guests instead of ambushing them. And most importantly, you deserve to know the truth about what happens when the cameras stop rolling." As she began walking toward the wings, Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Anne, wait! You can't just leave like this. We have a show to finish." She stopped without turning around, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "The show is over, Jimmy. It's been over for a long time. Tonight people just finally got to see it." With that, Anne Hathaway walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage with her head held high, leaving behind a host whose career was crumbling in real time, and an audience that would never look at late-night television the same way again. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Kimmel standing alone behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and defeat. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Some were still recording on their phones, others were whispering to their neighbors, and many were simply staring at the empty guest chair where, just minutes before, Hollywood's sweetheart had transformed into an avenging angel. Finally, a voice from the control room crackled through the studio speakers. "We're going to commercial." But everyone knew that no commercial break could erase what had just happened. The damage was done, the truth was out, and the entertainment industry would never be the same. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were trending on every social media platform, with hashtags like Yosh Ann tells the truth and Kimmel exposed dominating the conversation. By morning, Jimmy Kimmel's ratings had plummeted to historic lows, and calls for his resignation were echoing throughout Hollywood. Anne Hathaway had walked onto that stage as a guest promoting her latest film. She walked off as a woman who had changed the entire landscape of entertainment television forever. And for the first time in years, she was smiling. Not the practiced smile of a Hollywood professional, but the genuine smile of someone who had finally found her voice and used it to speak truth to power. The show, as they say, must go on. But after tonight, it would never be the same show again.